Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast, and today we're going to have a different episode. We are not having any guests today, and this has become a kind of a habit every now and then having these types of episodes. But in this occasion, what I am going to do with you is I'm going to go into one of the games I have played quite a bit throughout, for example, the pandemic, right? So I was playing many different things. I was very, very busy with work, but I would try to keep, a steady mind of myself playing some games. And one of the games that caught my attention for quite a long time, because I was especially curious about what the hype was all about, was Fortnite. So today we're going to be analyzing Fortnite through a couple of lenses. Of course, the first one and the main and the most important one is, what are some of those lessons? What are some of the things that Fortnite does and does well, of course, that maybe we can apply to our own experiences? And of course, as you know, I will typically be guiding it a bit more towards learning and education, but because it is, one of my main subjects of dedication and expertise, but I'm sure you'll find this applicable to many other areas. So let's begin. Let's kick this off. First thing that I would like to talk about is I'm splitting this into sort of 5 different ways or strategies that I'm seeing this, right? So, first is what Andrzej Marchewski likes to call RAMP, so Relatedness, Autonomy, Mastery, and Purposes. Those are 4. And then I have one I like to call Overall. These are not formally, some might be other things. They're not gamification or game mechanics by themselves necessarily. They are just things that I observed throughout my experience on this game, on Fortnite. I played, I think it was 3 seasons probably. I think it was 3 seasons of Fortnite. I've kind of stopped a little bit for the past weeks. But I got some interesting facts. I started reflecting upon it. I took some notes, and that's what I'm going to be going through. I'm not going to be reading. You probably know by now that I don't like reading out things. I don't read my episodes or anything of the sort. But I will be going through my notes to make sure I don't miss any of the things that I had sort of prepared for you. And the first thing is, I already mentioned it. The seasons. There's in Fortnite, there is, and in many games that aspire to keep a continuous engagement, something that keeps coming back. They do the seasons things. And this is something that is very applicable to many different contexts. Of course, if you create a game, if you create a gamification system for whatever it is you do, and you expect it to be there for the long run, there are many strategies for you to keep that alive through all these times that tend to happen before people actually start getting bored of seeing the same thing over again. And one of the things that Fortnite does is use this concept of seasons. So one of the ones I was most engaged with because of my character and the things that I enjoy very much was the one that they had with Marvel characters. So for example, part of I don't know. Well, actually, let's begin there before getting into the specifics of the season. Fortnite, for those of you who have not played it, it is a game that, if you just see it from the outside, the only thing you would probably be seeing is how people shoot at each other, right? And that is a very central and key point of the game. It's a first person. Well, it's not. It's a third person, actually. You're seeing from a third person shooter, right? So you land on this island. That is a very important thing. You sort of land somewhere in the island. You have a certain capacity to pick where you can land. There's a bus it's sort of floating in the air, and you launch your parachute, and you have several places where you can land. So you land on the island. Of course, one of the things you're going to go is start picking up materials because you land with nothing. You only have a thing called a pickaxe, right? So this pickaxe is basically for breaking down construction materials. I'll tell you about something I talked with Andrzej recently as well about this famous pickaxe, right? So you go there and you're probably looking for either construction materials, some items that could be useful, and your gun to be able to shoot other people. the player who wins that round, that round is basically the player who stands, or the team of players, depending if you're playing solo or team, that stands alive basically at the end, right? The last one standing. Since this is a game that is, massive in that sense, you are competing against other 100 people, or at least 25, maybe 30 teams, maybe even more if you're playing on teams of 2 people, maybe 50 teams. The chances that you get to win are very, very low in that sense, and we'll talk about that as well. However, that is sort of the overall outlook. Another important thing is that this island that I mentioned it has some changes on these seasons that I was mentioning, but the overall, the shape of the island is the same. Some things remain the same and some things change within seasons, but it tends to be sort of a familiar place, all right? Just keep this in mind when I'm explaining other things. So again, the seasons. Seasons have many different elements, but one of them is, as I mentioned, some parts of the island change, right? So for example, in this Marvel season I just mentioned before, they had sort of Doom's domain, right? So Doctor Doom, this character from Marvel, was kind of a bad guy. He has some times when he, kind of collides with the good guys. Depends on where he's standing. So there's Doom's domain. There was a place that was Stark Industries as well, from Iron Man, Tony Stark. And there was probably, the Weepy Woods is a typical scenery of the island in Fortnite, but there was where you would find the dwellings or the surroundings, or where Wolverine was to be found. And that was one of the missions that you could do there. So as you can see in the season, one of the things that actually happens is that they set some things that change, right? So prior, the place, for example, Doom's Domain was called something else. Tony Stark's Stark Industries location was something completely different. In fact, I think the name used to be Frenzy Farms at the previous season that I played, at least. So these things kind of changed to keep things fresh. So you don't have like all of the island already memorized for the past year if you've been playing it for over a year. It changes so that you have new challenges, new different things. There also changes something, and that's another element, another situation that I want to talk about is the theme, right? So I was mentioning this one was the one that we're talking about is about Marvel. So they have a theme. They have an overall theme over there that is actually going to be relevant because there, and I'm going to talk about this later, there is a story behind these themes as well. And there is, that's what brings you to your sort of higher purpose, right? And relatedness, autonomy, mastering purpose, the purpose probably comes in at that point, at least in the Marvel season, right? So those are some things that I wanted to mention to make sure that they are there. First off, I mentioned the seasons, keeping things fresh. Think that Fortnite is thinking of, or has been thinking of being around there for years, right? So if you play exactly the same game with no changes for years, typically people tend to get a little bit bored. Think of other games that have sustained throughout the years. There are things that are changing. One of the ways that they do this is through the seasons, and seasons include things like changes on the themes. In this case, the theme was about Marvel. Before that, there were no Marvel characters or themes whatsoever necessarily. Maybe in a previous season I didn't see, right? Next thing, one thing, and this is very important, especially I think it could be interesting for learning experiences, and it is about anonymity, right? So in here, you pick, a name, but nobody knows really who you are unless you want to disclose it. And typically that's something that I wouldn't recommend, especially in the online games. Things, that people have said that things get ugly, etc. I've never had that experience, but it's never a good experience to necessarily, a good thing to get beyond that anonymity. But what can we learn from that beyond, not sharing your name on an online RPG or an online game, multiplayer game? Thing that I see here is, and is very important, is we don't, and I highly stress this when we talk about our online learning interactive materials at IE, is the fact that using these games for grading is something I highly, highly recommend against doing, right? So you can have them be in this sort of anonymous place where they're interacting amongst themselves and learning and doing all these things, but you don't necessarily know who each of them are. Maybe you want to have sort of a back end where if needed, you're able to know who did what. But, maybe you have an honor code here and say, look, if you don't do anything that really, breaks something, or you insult one of your colleagues or something like that, I am not going to know who each of you is, so they can very freely interact with the system. Of course, there is, part of the rules is not breaking the rules, right? So if they break the rules, you're able to look into the back end and find out who did what, right? But in general, this is something that could be very, very useful, especially, again, when you don't use the experience itself for any sort of grading, or if you do it in a corporate sense, it's not going to be like, oh, who has more success in this simulation or in this game is going to be promoted. And again, this is something I recommend, I advise highly against, because you want to make sure that people are free there to commit those mistakes, to, have that really learning experience where they can do the things that, again, typically in front of their boss, maybe they just wouldn't, right? You're giving them that opportunity there. So this is something that I found very, very interesting in Fortnite, for very different reasons, but they also have this capacity to be anonymous. Nobody knows who you are within that, right? So another one. We're moving on from these sort of overall that I mentioned. Let's move into relatedness, right? That from the RAMP framework of Andrzej Marchewski. I'll put that in the show notes so you see what RAMP means. But RAMP is relatedness, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are some of the ways of intrinsically being motivated, right? So relatedness, as the word says, is it's relating to others, to other people, essentially. So there are many things that Fortnite does here to tailor for this intrinsic motivation of relatedness that we tend to have. One of them, the first one that I found, and that is very, very easy and obvious, and this is probably one of the elements that we always look at when people think of gamification. The first thing they think of is things like competition. So here they have a competition, but there is an important element here. In this game, I kind of mentioned it before, is the fact that you are competing against, if you're by yourself and not in teams, for example, you are competing against 99 other people. So the chances that you are actually going to win are so low that if you lose, you say, well, I had a 99% chance of losing anyway, so that's fine, it's okay. I can try again and see if I ever manage to have that victory royale. That's the name of yes, I won a couple of times. Very, very satisfied about it. But anyways, that is the name of when you sort of win. You can also play in teams. So you play in teams of 2, 3, or 4 people. That number, you still have 100 players within the thing. So instead of competing with other 100 people, you're competing against other 50 teams or 30 teams or 25 teams. But still, the number is so massive that, the expectation of winning, maybe the first time you kind of get frustrated. Oh, I had no chance. I ended up, at 95. Then you realize that that's kind of the point, that it's fine. You fail, you lose, and you try again, okay? Another very important thing here, and this is with the relatedness, I mentioned that here you can play in teams, right? So one of the things that you can do is, if you're within a team, somebody gets shot down, right? You can heal that person. So that relatedness that you're building there, you can help the other person succeed. So instead of just, sort of dying in there, the other person can depend on you, right? So you're relating, depending on other people. Remember, we've mentioned this many times on other episodes. Remember our ancestral brain, so to speak, who's been with us for so long as humankind, right? So this brain is still back in the ages when we lived in caves, and being by ourselves meant that we might not be able to make it out there, right? We had to be very social. We had to be together to be able to manage that group and fend out all of those dangers. Here it is the same. If you're playing in teams, the best thing you can do is relate with your team. If somebody gets shot down, heal that person so that you still keep your numbers. All right. So you have within your team, the dynamic is not only about, you're in a team and everybody has to do what they have to do. People have a role, and helping others means that your success is a bit higher. Of course, if you're in a competition with teams of 4, and this is a point and shoot game, which is also other elements like building, but it's a kind of a point and shoot game, your chances of succeeding are better if you have your 3 other colleagues, if it's a team of 4, than if you have only 1 or if you're by yourself. That's for sure. That's, part of the way the game is designed. There are ways there's very good players out there, but a very good player is always going to be a little bit better, even with an amateur player who's next to him trying to, even shoot once one of the other guys or act as a bait, right, for the other ones. And so the very good one is there. So you have that team. A team has a common purpose, and they actually really need each other to pitch in so that they can have a better chance of success. Very, very important one. So again, there is the team. Teams, an important thing about them, as far as I understand, I didn't design the game. I don't know exactly how it works. But as far as I could see, teams tend to be, as far as the data that I observed looked like, tended to be kind of balanced, right? So it was not like there was an overpowered team in general, unless you formed your own team, which is something that you kind of could do. But when they were randomized, it seemed like in general you had, at least a mix of players, so that you could learn from others, you could help others, you could be helped by stronger players if you're relatively weak in that sense. But that seemed to be something that was interesting as well. And it's not only about being in a team. There is the capability of social interaction. Thing is, you fall into the island. Let's say you're playing for the first time. You have no friends on Fortnite. You just are thrown in the island. You're playing there, and you fall into a team, right? It's some people you've never met before. If you had a good experience, there is something you could do. There's kind of a social network that you can build within Fortnite. You enjoyed playing with them. You can try to add them. They might accept. They might not. Just like, any of these social networks that you can see around, right? So you could start building that network. What happened to me, and again, this is my own personal experience, what happened to me when I connected and I saw some of the people I enjoyed playing with before that I had added, or they had added me, I said, well, why not form a team? I know this person, I don't know if it was a girl or a boy or a kid or an older person, I had no idea, but I enjoyed this. I think they were kind of dependable. Those at least were the kind of people I tried to add. They were kind of dependable. They were, healing your teammates and trying to pull through together. I enjoyed playing with them. I add them to my social network so that I can continue to play with them. So it's not only, in that case, it's not only about finding a team that they work together, which is super important. It's about, I kind of enjoyed playing with this team. You're starting to build, sort of meaningful relationships out of that. And again, whether that is within your gamified system or within whatever, the social system of that institution, you might be building. I didn't get to experience too much further than that, to be honest. I was in a lockdown, but I have my group of friends. But imagine yourself, you're not necessarily a sociable person. You start to relate to these people who enjoy something similar to you. You find some common interests. Maybe you have new opportunities to socialize with people. Why not? It could be an opportunity not only for learning whatever it is you're learning, but also for socializing and seeing that you have more in common with other people than maybe you were expecting. So very, very interesting as well. Moving on from relatedness, there is autonomy. There is a lot of autonomy here. You can, as I mentioned before, you can explore the island. You can just land there and start sort of avoiding other players not to get killed and just go around exploring the island. This was limited, of course. The game wants you to eventually face down each other. So they have this dynamic of, tell this at the beginning, there's a storm sort of closing in on the island. So it's a circle around which you can be basically alive, and it starts closing down. The center of that circle tends to move around, so it's not always the same place. But it's sort of forcing you to eventually face down, the last enemies who are standing. So you can have a lot of capacity to, explore around the island. Eventually you'll have to face other people, but you have that capacity to go around and explore, right? You can go around and explore. Another very interesting autonomy here, and this is where I wanted to bring in the pickaxe that I was talking about with Anjay the other day, is that you can build. This is a game where you not only do the point and shoot, but you can also build things. And apparently, I didn't know this, Anjay told me recently, that this was a game that was originally thought to be, or conceived originally to be, sort of a competitor to Minecraft, where you're building blocks and those things. Here, it's a very different aesthetic, and the way it looks, it's very different. But apparently that was part of the original dynamics that it had. So you had this pickaxe where you pick up the resources, like, again, in Minecraft, and you could build around things, and you still can. They are useful as well in fights. You have the structure that protects you, or somebody's coming to you, so you build up a wall. The walls can be broken down, yes, but you have a certain level of protection. If you do it right, some people were just amazing at this. I never got to master that too much. I kind of did some interesting things, but I didn't really get to master it. you have a very solid defense and way of sort of getting around people. Of course, if you have the higher ground, you're in a better position and you could build your higher ground there. So that element where you could basically decide almost anything that you wanted to build, provided that you had the resources, of course, is another element of autonomy and sort of being able to do mostly what you want in this game. Another thing, very quickly of this autonomy is you could, when you're walking around, you find these treasure chests as well. You can find some of the weapons lying around, but when you open these treasure chests, that's where you find sort of the sweeter things, the better things around the game. Of course, you can also pick up guns from people you took on, so you killed one of your adversaries, and you can take their guns. But these treasure chests tended to be very, very sweet, and there were some Easter eggs. I remember there was some sort of piñata or something like that where you could. It looked like a Mexican piñata or something like of the sort. It looked like a llama. In fact, if you open that one has like the sweetest of those types of loots, right? So that's another thing. You're going around and you're exploring, and you can find these treasure chests. So if you were that type of person who likes to explore around, you had this dynamic of exploration and of the Easter eggs and of the treasure chests that you could find all around the place. And finally, of course, if you are of those people who like to express themselves through the way you look, you had the capability of personalizing your avatars. And there's something very interesting, in particular, in this game in Fortnite that you could find here. And it's the fact, many things have been said, most of them true about, the micropayments and how many in the gaming industry are using this in not a very ethical way. And of course, if you want to talk ethics, at least in gamification, we have a couple of episodes on that. Go to professorgame.com, just type on the search bar, type ethic or ethics, and you'll find a couple of episodes on that. But, beyond the ethics, there is an interesting way of doing it here. What they say is, look, if you put some money here, you can do some meaningful changes. And when I say meaningful, if it's meaningful for you, for me, for example, I had never even thought of investing a single cent in Fortnite because it is a free-to-play game. You can play for absolute free, nothing you have to pay. You can use your computer, you can even use your phone, which I don't recommend, but you can play through your phone. That's how I started. It was, for me, I mean, maybe it's because I'm not used to playing games with my phone, but it was a horrid experience. But you can play on your computer, you can play on our console if you already have it, but they're for free, right? What you can invest in, and that's probably the biggest part of the revenue model for Fortnite, is in purchasing the skins. Well, it's basically skins because it's also skins for your guns. It's these kinds of things that make things look different in your character or in the hands of your character. In this one, again, I never thought that I would make a single purchase on this because, it's a superficial thing. The game for me is about something else. But then came along Marvel, right? I'm a fan of Marvel, especially two of my favorite characters are Spider-Man and the Wolverine. And they came up, of course, they were going to do this. They came up with one of the characters I loved, which is the Wolverine. It was super, super tough to get. You not only had to purchase, but you also had to do some meaningful missions to achieve that one. And it was actually one of the tougher ones because you had to actually take down the Wolverine, which I don't know if you're a kind of a nerd or a geek like me on Marvel. He has these regeneration abilities, which were reflected on the game. So it was really, really tough, really, really tough to take down. And of course, you had to account for other people. If you took him down and somebody else took his gear, it's as though they had taken the gear, not yourself. So, you had to watch out for all those things. But anyways, they convinced basically me. I spent, I don't know how much it was very little, like 5 years or something. But they convinced me, a person who was very off to that thing of putting in money, which for me was meaningful. But again, it's not, after purchasing the season pass, which is what I got, and being able to have all these characters that I got, because I was able to get Wolverine, but I also got Thor, I got She-Hulk, I eventually got Doctor Doom, Storm as well, many of the Marvel characters. There was no difference in my gameplay. In fact, nothing changed. But it gave me that nice feeling of being able to see the Wolverine in action. And, me playing as a Wolverine was something that brought me certain satisfaction. And this is something that is, in that sense, that I would argue is okay. Not, you purchase a game, which is something that actually happens. You purchase a game, and then to actually be able to enjoy the game, you have to purchase other things. That sounds terrible. I think they did it in a very sleek and interesting way. So again, we've gone through relatedness, we've gone through autonomy. Mastery, there is many, like in most games, especially in these games that are sort of in there for the long run, there's many ways to build your mastery. There could be building the mastery of your building capacity, of your shooting, etc., etc. But building on your skills here, the interesting thing here is, as I was saying, that you have the shooting, you have the building, you have completing missions, because there are different missions to achieve your characters during the season as well. Killing, you could even be very good at hiding. You had different choices here. Again, we were talking about autonomy before, but you had choices over what you wanted to master or what you wanted to start mastering with. One of the things I started mastering, to be honest, was hiding. I mean, I didn't want to face many other people because they were very good players and they shot me very, very quick. So I started mastering, hiding around to be able to make it to the final round when only 10 people were around. I started, sort of taking them out if I could, in a very sneaky way. That's how I started to hone my skills. I could have gone and it could have been one of those sort of in-your-face shooters that likes to, confront people and get very good at it. Many, many people were very, very good. That was not my style. That was not what I did. I managed eventually to get a lot better in that. Some other people as well went into, for example, the building. If you get very good at building, it can be a huge advantage, but it is your choice. You can see where you want to master, what you can master yourself. And of course, you can also master things like the island itself. Of course, there were some changes in each season, but the seasons lasted for a very long time, like 3 months or something. So if you were an avid player, you're constantly playing, you actually mastered the island and you know where to find the better guns, you know where to find good places to hide, where the people tend to hide as well, that kind of thing. You were almost, knowing how these things went. I got very good at the the forest where Wolverine was, basically, because I kept on hunting for that Wolverine for weeks. I spent a lot of time. I kind of mastered those woods in many ways because I was hunting for the Wolverine. Anyways, moving on from mastery to our final one, which is purpose. Here, they brought purpose in a very interesting way. I've mentioned this many times of the season, and I've actually been discussing a lot the Marvel season here. The way they brought that purpose, when you fall into the game and you are the one who can sort of save the world. In Fortnite, you're constantly playing against other players. But in this Marvel season, the way to wake up those characters was by playing the game and doing these missions. So essentially, you playing was allowing your characters like Thor, like She-Hulk, to remember, because they sort of fell into, there was a whole story. They fell into the island, and then, there's even a sort of an internal comic that they had there. I have, of course, I got the comic, the digital version of the comic within Fortnite, which I enjoyed quite a lot, but they had all this story, but basically they forgot who they were. They landed on the island. There's all these crazy people from the island of Fortnite shooting around and fighting amongst themselves. All they remembered was how good they were at fighting, right? So you were helping them remember things. With Thor, for example, you sort of picked up the hammer from somewhere and you had to do stuff with the hammer for Thor to remember who he actually was. And you're doing all of that to be able to save the island, right? So the island was going to be taken by this evil character, Galactus, who was going to eat up the island, and you were there to save it. That was sort of your epic meaning, your purpose within that game. And again, that changed with the season. Before that, there came I think it was the Aquaman season, and after that, there's this sort of bounty hunter season. There's different things that are changing, and they're sort of following up on trends as well. But the interesting thing here is the way they were using the theme with a different theme that changed to change the way that you saw your purpose within the game. How do you fit into this theme within the game? And I found that very, very interesting. It's something that I definitely see that we can apply in many ways in our learning. Sometimes I've seen, especially teachers in school, I've seen many examples of people who create this theme and they spend the whole year in that theme, which is absolutely fantastic, especially because next year you're going to get fresh new students, so to speak, and they will be, new to this theme. You can continue to build it up. You can reutilize many of the things that you already use so that you can actually get them better as well. But if you're going to if instead of, a school where you get new students, or a university where you get new students every now and then, if you have corporate learning situations as well, what about changing that theme, that purpose that they have within the theme, especially because you're probably going to have new objectives and things that are changing. In schools and universities, that tends to be a little bit more stable, so you can build on what you had from the previous time. But this is a very interesting element of how you bring that purpose that, you single-handedly are the one who can do this, or within your team, these are your abilities, into that theme so that they actually get to perform what they want and need to perform by themselves. So very, very quickly again, we went through the overall things that we mentioned before, the seasons, the theme, and anonymity, some ways to apply that maybe in your education or learning settings. Relatedness, including competition, but a competition, an interesting point here is that losing is okay. How do you make losing be okay if you have a competition, or even if you don't? With Mario, you fall down, it's kind of okay, you can do it over again. How do you make it be okay to lose and learn from the experience, which is what you want? Remember, in learning experiences, you want people to learn. If it's marketing, you don't want people to be frustrated by your brand. You want them to be able to sort of try again. How do you fix that up? The other thing that we talked about was teams. How do people relate? They also created this social network where once you play with somebody you were set up with randomly, maybe you can add them and become eventually even friends, right? Within the autonomy, we talked about exploring the island. So how do you set up the system so that people can also explore, have a look around, and even master, as I mentioned before in the mastery side, how do they master the island? Which are the places they can be around? The treasure chests, things that can be sort of found all around, even the Easter eggs that can be found in some places. The personalization of your avatar. In this case, I kind of went into that paid way of diving into things, but sometimes here it's about, even within a gamified environment, some people are interested in modifying their avatar. How do you convince them to do some things so that they get these, points or this in-game currency so that they can purchase changes or upgrades for their avatars? Because this is a meaningful inspiration for some types of players as well. Then we talked about mastery, building your skills, and you had the different options, right? Or the different paths that you could follow towards that mastery. If you have the possibility of allowing your learners to choose the way they want to master, that is absolutely fantastic. And of course, mastering the island itself. You were able to master your environment, your theme also. And finally, what we talked about, the purpose. How do you give your players that unique sense of purpose within your system? How do they feel that they fit in to this whole environment, and why are they important there? There's a story with, I'm talking a lot about Anjay today. I guess I'm remembering him from several conversations we've had. There's like a story of a cog, and it's the small cog and the large cog. And he said, I'm not an important part of the machinery. No, you are. How do you give them that sense of importance of how they fit into the whole machinery? And this could be whether it is your subject, how does it fit onto their, for example, their overall university experience? How does their role within the company fit in with the whole company mission, and how they are helping the company and their customers and their consumers move forward and get better. So think about all these things. Again, as you can see, this is something you can do with any games. In fact, this analysis of games, I went in a bit deeper, but when I am teaching gamification, when I'm doing workshops, I like to encourage, if we have enough time, people to play one game, just one, and analyze it through the view of the game and gamification mechanics, through the view of the types of players. Analyze it. What are the things that you can take from that? What engaged you in first instance? What did you enjoy about the game that maybe you could apply? And then, of course, try to start thinking about other people. What could other people be learning and engaging about? And I invite you to do this exercise. Why not? Actually, in fact, that's the way that we're going to close today. The message that I want to close with today is go ahead and play your game and play it under the lens that I've been speaking about. You can find the gamification mechanics in many different places. Anjay has 52 game mechanics and the gamification elements. There's the Board Game Geeks list of mechanics. There's many other things. I'll put those in the show notes. Find a list of game mechanics, read them through, and then play that game that you enjoy playing, whichever that game is, and analyze it through these game mechanics and think, what can I apply from these game mechanics in a learning situation? It doesn't have to be super specific, just to bring up ideas, to get inspiration. This exercise is definitely going to stretch your mind, stretch your gamification, your game-based solutions mindset, so that you can see how to apply these different things and share with me. I want to know how you did with that. If you have a full story, you can share it through email. If you just want to have some comments, you can do it on Twitter. So how do you get in contact with me? You can go to Twitter, Rob Alvarez B. You can find it there, or you can go to professorgame.com/Twitter and you'll find my account right there. Yeah, it'll take you directly to the Twitter. If you want to contact us through email, very, very quickly, just go to professorgame.com/subscribe. You'll get an email, reply to that email, and let me know what you think. What's your story? I am interested in knowing and maybe even sharing some of those stories in the future. And as you know, and as I like to say very, very usually when we end these podcasts, it is not over. It is not the end. But for now, and at least for today, for this week, for this episode, it is time to say that it's game over.